So thank you. It's always my honor to bring the department report. So again, as Superintendent Macaulay highlighted, we have a very special day coming forth on November 16th, really to highlight our classroom support staff and appreciation for all the work that they do. We also would like to recognize the health role that our nurses play in our school through our community partnership and health funding. We had staff members from social work and psychological services ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy training. We had over 35 staff who participated. It's a form of behavioral therapy that combines mindfulness skills with the practice of self-acceptance. October 24th was another with QP, health and safety, of course, the inclusive student services team, innovative technology, and of course, recruitment. It included topics such as an overview of DDSB strategic plan and the special education model, and an overview of classroom support staff, health and safety go-to guide, and how to access support through QP, district support staff, and school staff. On October 25th, our Vision Resource teachers participated in CNIB Connect the Dots conference. It focused on education technology and employment for people who are blind or partially sighted. I look forward to my team bringing that back and first sharing it with the rest of DDSB. And I'd like to actually put out an invite on Monday, November 14th, between 7 and 9 p.m. at the Ed Center, called Life Beyond High School Community Connections. And it's an opportunity for students and family to meet with Durham-based area supports in the area of community and recreation supports, financial supports, health support, education support, and employment supports. Thank you. That's the board report.
Anybody have any questions with respect to the board report? Okay. I'm just wondering about the north of the board and how that intersects with Life Beyond High School when events are occurring, and the geography and transition and transportation. How are we supporting that group?
We talk about past practice,
Okay.
Because we're just coming back in person. So the transition coordinators work with Michelle. And so it has been online. There is a website that supports it. The resource that will be shared out to all our secondary schools is all linked to all of the resources as well. Prior to COVID, we did run a central event here in the Exit Center, and we ran a north event at Port Perry High School that focused in North Durham services. The attendance ebbed and flowed, weather dependent, big impact. So this year it's a toe back into in-person and comfortability. They've set up for a survey at the end to gather who's not, and some feedback around that. So that's definitely feedback that Michelle can take back with the team to look at. But this is our toe back into large social events supporting families as well. And I will put an asterisk. Don just hosted 15th anniversary, and that was huge as well. So I think between the two, it's kind of the foray back into community events and social settings.
And
But very fair point.
very good question. As part of the survey, we are actually asking those questions as part of the survey at the end. It is a foray back to in-person. We're very excited about it because, as we know, for the past 3 years, actually, we've not been able to do an in-person event. We've had great community buy-in to the event and a lot of organizations that are coming. So a lot of work has gone into it. I'm very excited about the event, and as part of the exit survey, that will be asked in terms of accessibility. I am quite aware of the north, having the principal in the north, and it is one of the questions that's part of the survey to see if we can.
The reason I bring it up isn't from a voice member, but it is a family that has concerns. And one of the things they mentioned is that when they have gone to events at times, so for example, I don't want to out an agency, but an agency has their lens and their local place of support in mind and can't necessarily speak
to the fact that there are locations that might serve a family member. So I think it's those conversations, so if you are having it centrally, having reminded them that there might be supports available closer. Because I've been at this table where people have said, Rock is in Durham, and like they do, like, and if you don't know, you don't know. But if you're trying to ask someone to get to Whitby for employment support, that is such a barrier that and unfortunately, not every agency is equipped to know every office that they have or anything like that. So I would just mention that it's a conversation as we go, because we are like, there's so many barriers already. When we add those extra ones, geography and transportation, they're very real.
Fair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And some of the organizations are double or triple up,
Mhm.
such as Community Living has Community Living North.
Yeah.
Yeah, where all are
All
coming
of
together.
them, okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions with respect to the report? Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, so we are going to move on to item number 9, which is our SEAC membership for the members, 2 members at large.
And can I
Yes.
speak? Okay.
Yeah.
I am going to declare that I have a conflict of interest at this point, so I will excuse myself during the discussion.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And when we're finished with this item, would you mind just telling the door for Elizabeth?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, our subcommittee for the SEAC member at large met last Wednesday. We went through all of the applications. We had 11 applications to review. We looked at a few things. We considered which voices we had at the table, what associations sort of, were here. We also considered, if we were bringing unique sort of voices. So trying to really broaden the table with our members at large. What extra sort of are they going to bring to the table? So candidate A, which is the first one that was on top.
Yellow highlighted.
Yellow highlighting, yes, the yellow highlighting on the external email. When considering this application, we looked and said, if we were not looking at the name on the paper and what they brought to the table, is this a person we would consider for that position? And speech and language, which after this, which no longer communication disorders be at the table. Political experience as a speech and language pathologist, and SEAC experience, so understands the system and the world, right? So that's, and when we looked at that, we said, yes, we would be all over that. So that would be number 1. So that's sort of where we came to that recommendation for candidate A. Candidate B, we were looking at this person has a BA in psychology, grad certificates in addiction and mental health. But also, and I was looking up how to say this earlier today because I don't want to mess it up. Not a Wenmog, Uzia, translated is family and social services. So it's an indigenous band's social services, and they are currently a social worker or like a family services worker for that agency. We don't know if the candidate identifies as Indigenous, but it does bring, even through her work, a voice to this table that A is needed and B we don't have in any capacity. So that's why we really were looking at this candidate.
Or don't know.
Sorry, or
Don't know.
Or don't know I have, that's right, or don't know I have, you're correct. But that's one of the things we looked at and said, you know, in sort of deciding these candidates. The other selection that we had, there was a lot of voices that we have at the table. Children with specific identifications who we have representation around the table. So that's why we sort of said, let's focus on what we don't have at the table. So that's where we came up with these 2 recommendations. I don't know if you guys want to take a minute to take a look at the 2 choices we put forward. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So just in terms of a structure, in terms of SEAC membership, so recommendations come forward to the table at SEAC, but legislatively SEAC does not have the authority to do the final approval for membership. That resides under the Ed Act with our Board of Trustees. So the subcommittee is bringing recommendation to SEAC. SEAC would then have conversation to either support the 2 nominations or to ask for further information. And then the recommendation for membership goes through our trustees to the board for approval. So that's just why it sits a bit weird that SEAC's not able to approve its own membership, but it's grounded in the Ed Act. Because the Special Education Advisory Committee is a legislative committee of the board, advisory to the board. The Ed Act grounds that the board. That's right.
So
Just in terms of process.
yeah, that's right. So if the members that are around the table are satisfied with the 2 recommendations from the subcommittee, then we would need to make a motion to request that the board approve these 2 people as our members at large. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Or any concerns with respect to the 2? Want any further information with respect to the 2? Does anybody want to make a motion then to recommend that the Board of Trustees approve candidate A and candidate B as our SEAC members? Rowan? Any seconders? Kathy? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Okay, so our motion is passed, and because the motion is passed and that this information will now go into the Board of Trustees package, and it will be public, we can now save the names of the 2 candidates going forward, and that would be Elizabeth Daniel, who had recused herself, as well as Morgan Cameron. Okay, thank you, and we can tap on the door.
It's ready for the override.
Okay, thank you. And let's just congratulations for putting your name forward to the Board of Trustees to recommend they approve your nomination for SEAC member at large. Thank you. And just for the public record, Elizabeth had put in her resignation a couple months back for the Association for Children with Communication Disorders for a variety of reasons. And this just seemed to be a better fit for her skill set and her ability to advocate. So, okay. All right. Now that we've gone through that, then we are going to move on to preparations for our annual SEAC elections. So most people are, oh, hello. As most people are aware, December is our organizational meeting. Jenny, you might not be aware of that, but every December we follow the board's organization. So the Board of Trustees, the new Board of Trustees is meeting at the week, the 15th.
Yeah, the 15th.
And the 15th, yeah, and they will organize and, you know, chairs will be determined, committees and stuff that they'll be sitting on will be determined, and then we follow the board organization. So for our organizational meeting, so at that point, we will elect a chair and a vice chair. Traditionally, and it's not with respect to the bylaws or in the handbook, a trustee has been the vice chair. We got to thinking about that and just the fact that the trustees hold a voice just by nature of the position on the committee, and then we advise board. So it's a little, having a vice chair with the board is a little bit different because then you're kind of advising yourself. So we thought to amplify sort of community of voice, we'd like to see vice chair be another association as well. So chair and vice chair as association members, because the trustees already have a unique role around the table. And I think sometimes we have reluctant for people to want to sort of step up as chair, put the name for it as chair, maybe some people a little bit more comfortable even as vice chair, because it's not a commitment, but it's also a bit of a ability to sort of learn sort of for down the road type of thing. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments with respect to that or thoughts on it, but we just like to sort of lift community voice and association voice. And whether or not you consider putting your name forward for chair, vice chair. Yeah. So that sort of thing. Okay. And the other really important thing for the December meeting is that if you can't attend, it's really important to reach out to your alternate to attend, because we have to have a quorum for that meeting in order to elect the chair and vice chair. Okay. Stephanie, go ahead.
Just clarifying, because I had our association person reach out to say, do you need new letters of recommendation? And I said, I don't think in my board we do, but some boards do, and some boards don't. And I just wanted to confirm that we don't need, we haven't, yeah, I don't think we've done that, but I just want to double check in case we're all needing to rush, I'll like grab letters before next month. Okay.
Yeah.
No, historically we have, because technically under the Education Act, the SEAC is supposed to basically disband and reorganize every year, the same as the board does. But we found that is very disruptive to ensure continuity, ensure that, you know, we keep people here. So we basically have not done that.
Some boards are doing it at election, and so that was the reach out, but yeah.
I think if we were ever in a position because of the opportunities and limitations to the number of seats around the table, that if ever there was more organizations coming forward than seats at the table, then that would be an equitable way of rotating seats through time. But at this time, we are grateful for your commitment around the table. And as Eva shared with the member at large conversation, I think we're getting to a really good point in terms of different voices, and I'm thankful to be back in person, conversations that come through that. So we do not historically, but I think that would be the tip point where we would need to, is if the requests were more than the seats.
And in the 21 years that I've been on SEAC, I have never seen that ever happen. We've always been fighting to get the voices, searching, you know.
Putting an advertisement saying, please
Please
join our SEAC.
So
So
it would be a lovely, you know,
Problem to have.
problem to have.
yes. So you go ahead, Tara.
So I wonder, just before everyone's vacation, would it maybe make sense to, because I'm fairly certain that the roles and responsibilities are in the SEAC handbook for chair and vice chair, would it make sense to maybe extract that snippet and circulate in case anybody would like to have to think about it
Yes,
for
Yes.
December, so that they know what they're getting into, just to be specific?
yes. And well, we're on that topic of SEAC handbook. And the SEAC handbook as well as the bylaw for SEAC. They have not been updated or reviewed since before I joined SEAC. Because Donna mentioned a name I've never even heard. So, yeah, I was like, who?
Yeah.
So we're talking like probably 15 plus years since they were reviewed. So we're thinking in January that we need to, as a SEAC, review the bylaws, make sure that, and the handbook, and make sure that we're now, that they're up to date with the new legislation. There's tons of legislation that's come into play since those were written. We are now using, creating a public meeting by streaming live stream to YouTube, where now there's actually a record of the meeting following us leaving tonight. This isn't something we had prior to COVID, so I'm suspecting there's much that could be updated and should be updated. So I think, January's discussion period should really involve reviewing that. So if we could get copies of the bylaws and the SEAC handbook in general sent to everybody, so you guys can start going through and reviewing it and ahead of the meeting maybe.
What's board specific and what's provincial?
So we can send a copy of regulation as well, the regulations. And that will sort of go through. So what's provincial is a lot to do like with, how board members are selected, the qualifications to sit, where they, sort of the mandatory, residency requirements and stuff. And I think how the meetings run.
The number of
Well,
meetings.
The number of meetings per year is 10, yeah. But the regulation is not very long. Don't want to scare anybody, because usually when you think legislation, you think pages of stuff. It's not very long. But that way you can sort of see what the regulation is and what, our mandate is even through there.
The fact that we have.
Yeah. And notice and objects, yeah. So it's fairly basic. So we should take a look at it, and we should take a look at what we have currently. And maybe put in the bylaws a clause for review, mandatory review after, every 5 years to keep it current. Yeah. Okay. So. How the elections go? Yeah, sure. A quick overview of how the elections go is the meeting will start off in December with Andrea chairing, because we won't have a chair. So after tonight, once we adjourn, I'm no longer chair. Andrea will begin the meeting. The first item will be the election of the chair. So somebody can put their name forward, or somebody can nominate somebody, and they may accept. And then there's a vote on the chair. The chair then takes over the meeting, and the election goes. Then the election for vice chair happens. Same sort of procedure. Somebody put their name forward, or somebody can nominate them, and hopefully they accept, and a vote will happen on that, and then you'll have a vice chair.
Vote will only happen if we have more than one name submitted, right?
Right, oh, that's true, that's right, if we have more than one name submitted, and this is, it would be a lovely problem to have at some point.
Yeah.
Again, back to that lovely problem. If there's more than one name submitted, then we do have a vote on, so each person would have an opportunity to sort of explain why they'd like the position of chair or vice chair, and then the committee would vote for both of them, and the person who received the most votes then would become chair or vice chair. Okay. Any questions? Summer? All right then, we will move on then to our open discussion and, which comes down to the review of the accessibility plan. This was actually deferred over to this meeting because last month, there wasn't a lot of members around the table. We wanted to make sure there was a lot of voice on the review of that. Do we want to get into like pair up or whatever and look at it together, make some comments on it, and then come back to the table, maybe take 10 minutes, and then come back to the table? Do that, okay? Split? Yeah. Yeah.
Fine, Carter.
So probably we should the accessibility plan.
Yeah. Maybe go with another two.
I was, and then Carolyn was, and that's it, that's what I get.
Okay.
May I join in and just listen?
And in my head, I just like. Just go. You know
Okay.
I was just saying.
You want me to join this group?
I thought we were just gonna.
Okay.
Yeah. I thought Margot was.
I'm saying, I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say, because our last time. Expecting a robust discussion, because there are some points that.
That's right.
needed to be addressed, and I actually think it touches on quite a lot of things, and you don't want it to go into a lot of detail, it's a skeleton.
Right, this is, yeah.
Is this now, is this?
Oh, yeah.
So this will be 20, the newest iteration, and it'll be valid then until 2026.
Okay.
So, yeah,
So Michelle,
2026.
are you going to
Okay, I know we had some great discussions, so I'm looking forward to hearing about everybody else's discussions. Should we just go around the table here and maybe you guys can talk about what your group, somebody can talk about what your group's ideas? Setting a few numbers here.
I guess we ended up focusing mostly on the employment goals, so goal 3 and 4. And we just had questions when it comes to specifically thinking about disability, if we are monitoring whether we are having a more diverse workforce, if we define it only as disability and not looking at different types of disability, then we might think we're achieving our goal when we're not, because like we love this idea of universal design, but we're talking about, so like reviewing interview tools and materials for accessible and inclusive language. We're saying if the tool itself isn't accessible or is biased towards one type of person, it might really harm someone. So what's the tool and what's the format, as much as the language matters, because we just talked about interviewing and how like someone who's neurodivergent, someone who has a learning disability, it can be really difficult. Someone with hearing loss, you're only sharing, like if it's an interview and it's all oral, that's going to have, you're never going to have certain people be successful, despite their abilities. And I guess the other comment we had was with goal 4, we're talking about, just that, how do we monitor that we are doing this with people that are stakeholders represented? If we want increased diversity and disability representatives, then how are we ensuring those types of people we're aiming to include are at the table? Because if we're designing things to be inclusive, to ensure we have a more diverse workforce, but it's only created by white people, for example, you're probably not going to be drawing in the right people. And if you design an interview, but it's designed by someone who's neurotypical, then you're probably not going to capture some of the things that are going to attract different types of employers. So like not for us, without us kind of idea.
Some good comments. Yeah. Ron, you get to speak. We are
Sure. So we looked at a couple points. Accessibility, just incorporating the new communication methods we've had. A pandemic, we've had to use other forms of communication online, that type of thing. How does that affect what we were doing before and what we're trying to do now? How are students learning with these new types of technologies? I know I speak from the Learning Disability Association. Many of the other ones have challenges online, so people thrive with the online methods. Some are basically pulled back, so it's difficult. How do we incorporate that into the new, basically, policies? Also, self-advocacy, its truest form. We have the resources, but a lot of times when you're, you have somebody in the class to show you, okay, this is where you need to go to get this, but when you're not on class, they're not always in the environment with that person to assist you. So how do you do it yourself? And we have to teach the students how to do it themselves. Eva brought up a good point. When the children were younger, she had to show them that she was doing a lot of it, but by grade 12, they were doing it themselves. We want to be able to see if we can find a way so that the children, as they grow up, become able to advocate for themselves, get all the resources that they need so they can not just survive, but actually thrive. And lastly, the new builds so we are putting a lot of these accessibility physical aspects into new builds, and we'll have an old place and we'll put a renovation of some sort on there, and we're doing what's the minimum so we can pass all the building laws. But does it make sense if we just have to put one in and we put it on the far left-hand side, but in order for someone to actually get to these, they have to come this way? So are we thinking about this holistically and as opposed to just ticking off a box? So we want to make sure that that's appropriate as well. That's it.
Well, and just threw you into the table. I find that our planning team has a quite a strong lens in terms of inclusion, accommodation, and are very active listeners to what's important. And I would agree that we do have buildings in a variety of ages, but we are also a growth district board with some enrollment pressure points and advocacy for continuation of opening of new schools. So knowing those kind of, we've got a team that's very receptive to further inputs and learning and have a background, but are always in that learning stance. We've got conditions around capital funding that put some layers to the plans as well. But we know that we're in a really unique situation to other districts in that we're one of the few districts provincially that's going to be building new schools at a fairly good rate over the next few years. Based on your reflection, would it be of interest to SEAC to have our planning team come to a SEAC meeting and walk through what their process is and some of their inclusion commitments, and then also hear from you through the lens of the associations and students and families that you support, what would be wishes and requirements, and maybe we would be able to have a conversation with them that if we could live in the land of ideal, what would that look like, sound like, and then that gives them something long-term targets to work on. I just don't know if that would be of interest to the table. I know we talk a lot about accessibility of the program, and accessibility of communication, and we consider some of the physical footprints in our buildings to be things that are foundational, but that still needs to continue moving forward too. So I wonder, just for the committee's consideration, if that's something you would like us to take back and ask that they come for one of the open discussion periods, they could be the presentation and go in. I think that would also give SEAC as advisory to the board, as board approves design plans and advocates at the ministry for funding. That might be a way to bring the recommendations and the standards into a conversation with the planning team, composite to hear and be able to have a really good conversation if that was the will of the table.
I think it's a good idea, especially because I was an engineer. I was telling the story where we would basically just do what's on the plan, and we never had any real life input. So I think to take those that are looking off the plan and those that are dealing with it day to day, to bring that all together, let's put all the ideas on paper, and then we can sort of go from there. That's a great idea.
Sure.
I was just gonna say that really a good resource, if it was quite substantial, was the K-12 building standards, because it specifically, had mentioned that the existing AOPA standards, building code, the building code, it does not reflect the needs of what is really required. And one of the things is that we had a person like come in to talk to us whose specialty was as a consultant to architecture and builders around accessibility. And I think she actually gave us a cost, and I can't remember if I can find it, where to actually do the planning up front. Yes, it is costly to add some accessibility features, but doing it up front, it's a lot less cost than it is to then go back and basically make additions or make changes to the physical building. Also the fact that there is no real course around designing around accessibility or certification, really, there isn't. And I think there's one video that is on the internet of an individual that was on the K-12 accessibility committee. He himself, he's a lawyer, and he himself is blind. And he did a video of going through, I think it was the Scarborough campus, U of T, I believe, the newly designed based on the building code as it exists. And it's quite interesting to watch of all the issues with that building. There's a long version and there's I think a 15-minute version, but there's also a very long version of all the barriers that he had. And he physically showed them. But I also know of a community center in another municipality where they decided to, for some reason, the electricians decided to put the plugs all the way up higher for some reason, and they weren't accessible in the change rooms, and it was just something that decided. I also know that our own staff, as planning people change in municipalities, have had to, because it's not in the actual accessible, in the building code, arguing about the placement of accessible parking spaces. They wanted to change them. And because it was a new staff member that came in, said, no, you can't do that. So I mean, there's that integration of working with our municipalities as well, because they do approve all of our plans that the building inspectors that come in are from the municipalities. So that is that whole learning experience. So it'd be great to hear from the staff as far as the issues that they see as well. And go from there. Funding, we'll talk about a whole different story. I can honestly say that there's no, the only thing that ministry does when they review capital projects is they review that accessible features, yeah, check, it's a checklist. They do not actually check and verify, it's just a checklist, yeah, it's there. There's not a standard list.
That's exactly what we were discussing, that concern is what we're discussing.
That's what exactly.
Checking a box is not making something accessible.
Yeah.
Putting an automatic door that is not, where you have to go from, one side to the other to operate it, it's not accessible. So there's, so that's some of the stuff that we're talking about with that too. I think that would be fantastic to keep us in mind. And it would be interesting to hear some of their struggles when it comes to the approvals through the municipality, because that is actually another form of advocacy, right? That SEAC can look at, especially in relation to new builds, if there's, pushback on, certain things that are accessible or they're struggling with things, to say, hey, you need to start, your building inspector need to start being trained on accessibility. By those who it impacts, right? Because, I think that's the other side, is people making decisions who aren't actually impacted by the decision that they're making. So it might seem fine until you're the one using it. So, yeah. So
My only request would be that we don't just talk about new.
yeah,
I think that, like, it's great to talk about what a new school is gonna look like, but for the majority of our students, that is not their reality. So I think understanding what it looks like for those who aren't would be, whether it's additions because we're adding on to schools, or the portable conversations, things like that, that are all the reality, I think would be important.
yeah, and that's something at our last meeting, as I said, we brought this forward next, want a bigger conversation at the table, right? And I said, I know you can't retrofit every school right away, it's a process, but I think audits need to be done on the schools, the older buildings, and to see what, start making a plan to deal with the accessibility in the older buildings.
So just a couple examples, Kathy, to your point, very fair. One of the most recent renovations was at Coronation Public School in Oshawa, where the gym was actually not accessible without stairs or an exterior entry. And the kids can have freely move through the building, which is really, really important. And then some of the considerations that are now foundationary to our new schools. Every single new school is opening with a clinical space, understanding that our schools are hubs. And we have made a commitment within our collective agreement with our own regulated health professionals that there is a secure space, that if you're in a conversation with a social worker or a speech language practice doing a assessment, that shouldn't be with a photocopier running or another staff member accessing through that space. So they're opening with that. 2 purpose-built special education classrooms with alternate space off of them. And we've had conversations even so far as for music rooms to be built at the end of hallways with a soundproofing wall between them and the classroom next door. Because when you locate a music room centrally and the music beautifully flows, it's not a beautiful flow for everybody that's hearing it in terms of that sensory load on the other students. And so Willow's Walk has a buffer wall between the music room and the next classroom. And they have also in the elementary schools increased the size of a couple of the classrooms, noting that with integration, there's an increase in student numbers and an increase of adults supporting the kids. And so therefore pre-planning a couple of rooms that would be the partner classroom to the special education classes, noting integration. So not a perfect science yet. Braille built into the signage. We've learned from our kids. Please don't switch the side lights. Have the side lights will go to the same side. That came from one of our students with vision needs to say, if I always know that the side light's on this side, then I'm gonna better be able to locate the door. Whereas if you switch the side light, I'm gonna aim and hit a wall because I'm aiming for that small visual acuity. So lots of learning, but lots of listening still. So I think we've got a really good team that is constantly learning. But I think this would be a really valuable table for them. I think it's important for our trustees as SEAC as advisory, and then as Donna said, a really good opportunity in terms of advocacy for the systems that impact on all of us doing that collaborative work for families. So I will reach out to them and ask for some time later.
Yeah, okay, that'd be great, thank you. Anything else to be added?
Michelle will take it back to me if that's okay.
Perfect, thank you. Speaking of the accessibility committee, we talked about having a SEAC member, because our SEAC member that was part of the accessibility has resigned.
Do you want to wait to get the members up or?
Yes, yeah, okay, and then we'll have that discussion because it's nice to have a SEAC member voice on the accessibility committee. It's great work. I did it for quite a while when it was on the day that I wasn't working. Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, we'll move on to the business arising from the minutes. SEAC survey, I think there was a couple other comments on that, but I think we're almost ready to decide whether or not that's ready to go. Maybe we could circulate the latest version, and then by the next meeting, we can vote on whether or not we want to sort of push that out during, I guess, typically we've done it during sort of the IPRC season, right?
Yeah, and then we'll just need to time it out of cycle from the positive school climates and well-being survey as well as student census, so that we're not over surveying families. So we'll ask accessibility and accountability to just, accountability and assessment to give a projection, and then we'll bring that to the table.
Okay. It was great if we get the families up during their IPRC to say, please do this survey, right? If you can, schools can be doing that. That would be great. Okay, and the other item for rising from the minutes, actually from the previous month is the latest draft of, another letter with respect to the special incident portion claim. If you guys would like to review that letter and let me know if you have any comments on it. I need to update the dollar amount, I know that, so I'll have to redo the math, because I found out the claim is, or the reimbursement right now is at 28,803. So I'll redo that math. And what I think this is. Front page. Yeah, okay. There is actually a second page.
That was an interesting sentence to end on.
Yeah, just no signature, nothing. That's okay, we'll circulate it, and you guys can let us know, let me know. I wouldn't mind getting that out next week. We can have it.
You guys, Donna, Christina hand it right to the minister on your advocacy day.
That would be,
Please look at this if you haven't seen it, even though it's addressed to you. Yeah, yeah, well, yeah. I just looking at it. Same read all the time. That's all. Yeah, right.
Remind me again what the local priorities funding is.
So the local priorities funding is funding that the ministry, it's not guaranteed funding. So in the previous bargaining session, I think it was QP that managed to sort of have a rethink. So that, yeah, few. So it's funding that was given to the board by the province, a priority, something that was local to their board that was they saw as a priority, and the DDSB has used that money towards that shortfall of special education funding. But it's never guaranteed money, right? So, you know, use it now, but what happens if they don't reinstate it for the next year? You're out that money, right? So it's not sustainable, right? You can't depend on it, so.
Do you want me just to give you a suggested?
You can just give them to me, and
Yeah.
I'll make the revision, I'll sort of incorporate them all, and then, if you, like, do you guys want to sort of approve it in principle, you know, we'll send you that last paragraph. Oh, you have it here? Okay. You want to print it? Yeah. Is it up on the floor? Oh, then, why don't we just circulate the electronic to? We'll do it. We'll make these changes. We'll make these changes, circulate it. Do we want to do a C? We can go with it, needs, but.
The that's in that sentence, it's hard to figure out what that is referring to.
Yeah, but she's.
So we were saying
Yeah,
the
yeah,
increase
I don't like
that we
that. Yeah,
allocated.
Yeah, no,
I know what you meant, but I would just.
yeah, I typically don't, I try
I
to.
know what
take
that
out
means.
the same, yeah, it's confusing, I agree. And, yeah, okay. Yeah. That's fine, I know Donna, I think Donna's got a couple of revisions, and then we want to approve it in principle with the changes so that we can just get it sent out, or do you guys want to circulate it for electronic vote? I think it's really just like revising it a little bit and then sending it back, so it's not the exact same letter that we're just changing.
Really sent this letter multiple times. All these right there. So.
At least once.
Motion approved.
Motion to approve the letter, seconded, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion passed. All right, so I will make the revisions and then we'll get that sent out. Lisa. Okay, moving on
on then to the association reports and the committee reports. None were circulated electronically. So, yeah.
Now that we're back in person and we clearly didn't do very well at getting you our reports, can we go back next month to just?
Yeah, do you have a report?
We have other news programs running, like, we don't have a lot, but,
But, yeah,
but
yeah.
I think,
Yeah, absolutely, because I think the reason we started doing that is because we were just kind of
I
paused and
appreciate the
we
intent.
couldn't see any, yeah. So it was harder to sort of moderate it that way, but yes, we can do that, but.
I appreciate it being much nicer, Lisa, and, you know, we got them to her ahead of time, but if we can get them to her by the end of the meeting and say it and then share it, and
Yeah.
Sorry, we forgot the forward, it's like hard to watch.
Okay, as we'll let you get to your seat now, let's make sure you don't have an association report to share. Nothing? No? Okay, you're good? Okay. All right, any correspondence? Very quiet correspondence. I guess we need to get it going again.
It was election time and whatever, so.
Well, I think that's what happened to our last letter regarding SIP. We got no responses. I think it's probably because nobody actually looked at it because the election campaign had started, despite the writ not having dropped. So, okay, moving on then to community concerns. Rowan?
I'm so sorry, I'm just going back a couple of steps. We were talking about the items that we submitted and no one's ever looked at them. We have an opportunity now where we're meeting them one-on-one. Is that an idea?
Yeah.
For how long? Is it gonna be like a show of face, like a 10-minute thing? Does it spell sense to say very quickly, some of this is what we're looking at, just so that we can get some type of feedback, or they just, oh, we'll take this under advisement? So I feel like we fall back into the same situation we always do.
Well, I mean, we're gonna send this out via email, but it would be nice if Donna and Christine could hand it to them and say, you really need to look at this, right? As well as also, like, can we also use up-to-date census data? Like, how about we start there? So we're not knowingly underfunding special education based on out-of-date census data?
As long as we can highlight while we're there,
Yeah.
it's great to give them the sheet, and there's probably more to it than I've done before, but we're handing them a sheet, and say, this, and this, as opposed to giving it to them and then sort of just, okay, placating us in terms of, okay, this is great, we'll take a look at it, because then that meeting doesn't really have as much value, and I don't know what the meeting, consists of.
You're talking about the advocacy day.
The day
So
meeting.
what happens is that currently Alpha has a survey that goes out and it's done to the general public, and it basically there's always a theme that's associated with it. And then we get back the results, and that day we actually release the results and they present the results. As far as that, we are then given a copy of the survey results. I think I'm trying to remember what the last time it talked about, but it had about, parents' perceptions around education, and there was a whole bunch of stuff in there anyways, and I just can't remember it at the time. But then we presented the results, and then they also set up individual meetings with the MPPs of the areas that we represent. And we go and we basically talk about those results. But then also we have the ability to bring up additional items that are concerns from our own particular areas as well. So it's a two-phase thing. It's a lot of times we actually have a lot of more or less education going on with some of our MPPs exactly around education and especially when it comes to funding and the understanding of the issues around funding and the supports and so forth as well. So I know that there are some questions around COVID and the impact of COVID and so forth on the questionnaire. So those would be the highlights of that, what we're seeing in in the school system, the support that's required, so, but yeah, so that's sort of what happens.
I think when I hear FaceTime, I just think, okay, this is our chance to get whatever we want across, whether it's half an hour or 5 minutes, and if we can highlight that in concert with any, the information to look at later, sort of two forms.
And that's basically what we do. We have the survey, we have the survey highlights, right, that we actually can hand to the MPPs. And then we also have, and these are the key points that we want to stress from that. And then we have a bit of time to sort of discuss local concerns. It was really, really well received. Not all MPPs participate because they basically make themselves available. And I think the last time within the Durham region, we only met with 2 MPPs out of the whole area, but it was good. And I know that we have actually also has a policy and programs meeting coming up, of which we have invited the Minister Lecce as well as their budget system. As far as whether they come, and it'll be a question. There's question periods as well, so we have that happening next Friday, and it's but we also present a lot of our information to the education critics as well of each of the parties, so that we're presenting the same information to everyone.
What does that acronym stand for, OSPA?
Ontario Public School Board Association. It's the trustee association for public school boards. There's also the Ontario Catholic School Trustee Association, OXA. And there is the French Trustee Association, as well as those are all the associations that are this is something that OSPA has done. I think this is now will be its 3rd year that it's actually done as an advocacy to understand sort of the role of trustee, but also put education at the forefront and what the issues are.
Thinking how useful that would be for healthcare too. I don't know if there's an improvement.
I do know that we do have a mental health coalition that involves many of our partners, our health partners as well, that it's actually a OSPA does sit on there, but they were the ones who basically led it. There's a whole slew of initiatives from that. They used to put every 2 years, there was a workshop at the conference where groups, boards would go and attend, as well as far as that was concerned, of staff members and trustees that would go. And it was, it'll be coming back up. All you have to do is go to the Ontario Public School Board Association, OSPA.org, and you will find a lot of the initiatives that they have done. And responses to right now they're gathering response to the grants for student needs consultation, and if the letter goes in there, so you can see all the responses, and it's a collective letter from all of the public school boards.
Okay, any other community concerns?
Donna, I did leave the busing to this particular part of the agenda, so if you wanted to go ahead and talk about.
Okay. I mean, we're well aware that we do have a driver shortage, and it doesn't help with the COVID still happening and peaking. But there is issues of, and that's one of the things that has been happening. When we talk about equity and access to buses, I know that one day last week there was 9 cancellations made at Pickering I know of a bus that was, that has been canceled the last 3 days, which parents were extremely upset. And then also just the disruption to the students getting on those buses, is been very difficult. So there's a huge concern. I do know the reasons why. It is a provincial issue as far as bus driver shortage, but it's getting to the point where we have families, especially when a bus is being canceled for 3 days in a row. Families that don't have access to vehicles themselves, that rely on public transportation, and they can't make. So it actually, being able to get a child to school to do the learning, or arriving late, and basically interrupting their schedule of their day. So, and when we're talking about students with disabilities, it has usually a larger impact. It's not all students with disabilities take a small bus, right? With us, take a large 72 passenger buses as well. So it's just a huge concern that is coming, and the constant of not knowing whether a bus is going to come today or not.
I just add a little bit of something around the fact is that we've used all of our supply teachers, our supply bus drivers, but it is a major priority with the board for us to hire more. I know that the board is in the process of trying to do that at the moment, so it is a priority, and hopefully we'll be able to get that on track fairly soon.
And it just, we did do the bell time review change in order to basically minimize the increase in the number of buses that were required. But then it doesn't help when you have an explosion of enrollment of over 1,400 students, and bus routes have to be, so not necessarily that all of them will be bused, but it does have an impact when it comes to rerouting and ensuring that students have access to transportation. So it has a ripple effect when it comes to that. Recognizing that transportation is one of the issues that we know that on the Ontario School Board that we have talked about several times around transportation, the funding of transportation, the increased costs of gasoline, etc. It's a huge issue, and the 2% raise for consumables isn't enough. When it comes to transportation, and but it is a provincial issue. We recognize that. I think our staff have done as much as we possibly can, but it's really starting to affect the quality of education, access to education for our kids.
Just a thought on that busing issue. I know at one time, that the Durham Transit had stopped providing a discount to the school board for busing for the competitor passes to high school students. Is that something that could be revisited or should be revisited?
I could maybe address that. I think I've been involved with that. We have had conversations with Durham Region Transit. There were several routes that were stopped during COVID and haven't been reinstated. And so we've been talking with John Henry and the people at Durham Region Transit about them reinstating some of those routes. And we had negotiated through our communications department and Rob Sajanic in communications, we've negotiated a special price for our students. So we need additional routes. We have negotiated some special pricing, but as the numbers of students access those routes, then we can negotiate better pricing. So it is in the works. Ava, that's a good question. Thank you for raising that.
Okay, anybody else have any community concerns? To raise? Interesting enough, I have, I was gonna bring it up. My local school, my kids, ended up going to AG Bell and not to my local school, South Park, which is a French immersion school, and I've heard this concern a number of times from kids, especially kids who have, some of our special education learners who require EAs and sort of supports and stuff. When you have a dual track school, the French immersion seems to sort of overtake. And the English portion starts to become, really ends up having, you end up with, I know the Southwood is a good example where there's like, all the English classes are split. It's like a 1-2 split, 2-3 split, like all the way through, because there's not enough kids in that stream. And it's something that I've been talking about and saying, and I know I've thrown it down more than a few times over the years, that I didn't feel by the time my youngest went into grade 1 that English was an option any longer at that school, because at that time, and I'm sure it's worse, like it's sure nothing's changed as far as that go, given the numbers that are in the school. There were, I believe, 5 or 6 grade 1 French immersion classes and 1 grade 1-2 split. In that grade 1-2 split, 17 children were identified. So, and 2 EAs. So my perspective is, and now I have younger neighbors whose kids are going in, and I'm hearing the same concerns that parents have been talking about for quite some time. That in the English program, none of the kids are getting what they need. Because in a single track school, like an English track school, those children would be, you'd be dispersed, right? So it wouldn't be such a, sort of a collective group of children with special education needs. So the kids who require accommodations and services aren't really getting that to the level that they deserve. And then the kids who maybe, especially in the older grades, will be transferred into the school, this is now their home school, there's not an option to go to another school, like this is your home school, that's where you're going. They're not getting what they need either. So you're having, it just seems to me, I'm not sure when or why it hasn't been, like when it would be, or why it hasn't been looked at, especially given there are schools within that area that are under have less kids than they are under capacity. Why we're not reviewing that and looking at making those French immersion track, and then moving the English program kids to creating a home school that is just an English track school for those kids. Because I hear parents and stuff, I know neighbors down the street, their kids are in an elementary school at Southwood, and one of their children has special needs, and this is the struggle that they're going through. And other friends are commenting on the same thing. And I just think there comes a point in time where, as a board, the board needs to start looking at the equity for those kids. So
Could I speak to
yeah.
the comment we've not asked? I can't speak to Southwood Park, but I will take a look at it. We have been monitoring a number of our dual track schools very carefully, because we found that prior to COVID, and I have to speak to Whitby because those are the numbers that I look at most often. That's my area. Prior to COVID, we found that in the dual track schools, we were often 1/3 English to 2/3 French immersion. During COVID, we had a number of families, often kids in French immersion, their parents are English speaking people and can't always support them in the French program. So what happened during COVID was that pattern or the dynamic there started to change. And the feedback that we had is that now we've got 50-50. So which it's something that we'll continue to monitor. But definitely that's something for us to consider, Ava, when we're dealing with the lower numbers and those split grades and some of the schools, the students who needs the special education support.
And I can honestly speak to something since I know it's one of my schools, and that according to the planning report, it's a 30-70 split, but between, you know, English, French, however, that's just the planning report. That isn't the reality. The reality is it's more like in speaking, it's more like a 20-80 split, and it is split grades all the way up. I can confirm that I have had several problems from that school, and it's you know, looking at the whole child and what the needs are of the whole community and best serving that. And I think Andrea has heard me speak about several times about looking at the French immersion programs within Ajax. Yes, there was the trend as far as COVID that some of the French immersion numbers did drop. But I think that it's really crucial to start looking at from a planning perspective, meeting the whole child's needs with the whole community's needs. When we're looking at the planning, because it can't be just based on numbers, recognizing that worst thing from parents' perspective, that we do reviews of boundaries and programs, we do get a lot of complaints and people that come out that are against the change. A lot of times it is a lot of work on our staff as well as it is to talk about, see, these are the options, this is what available. Eventually, we've had some closures and consolidations of schools, particularly not recently, but in past, particularly in offshore, there was like 5 either closures or consolidations into a bigger school. And there was many concerns, but it's a matter of how it's planned and how it's coordinated and the benefits of then being able to support all the needs of the appropriately in the school. So, but it is definitely a concern for children, particularly I know in Ajax as an issue with supporting all the needs when we have a small street. I'm sure the administrators would somewhat have some of the same comments when it comes to supporting such a huge difference in between English and French. Number of students.
Well, I'm just wondering if there might be some time in another meeting to look at what support in French immersion looks like, because I think there's actually a step back from this, because I know there was no access to French immersion for my daughter with her disability, because we don't have hearing resource teachers who can support French programming. And so that's one example of a child who could not access that programming. Speaking in French, by the way. Loves favorite, like one of her favorite subjects. We love Madame Betty. So having said that, it's interesting that as a product of French immersion in the way back days, you moved kids out. If they were struggling, you moved them out. And we now try to look at learning differently, and yet we still seem to see the reoccurring patterns, and the question becomes, why is that? What services are being supported? So I would argue there are kids who are being withdrawn, who should not be, who are not being served in their placement that they've chosen as one part of it. And if they're not being served, I get why they're doing it. So that's a question, and I think as SEAC, we probably need to be thinking about that. And I know there's a shortage of French teachers, which means there's a shortage of French EAs, all of those pieces, but what are we doing about that?
Yeah.
Because whether the board has dual track or not in a building is beyond me, and I'm not gonna stress about that one, because I'm not making that decision. But I am thinking that at SEAC, we really need to be talking about why we have such a or do we, like, we don't have the data. Can we look as a whole system at the data of kids in dual track schools, amalgamate it, so it's not to one specific school, and say, what are the ratios of identified learners by IPRC in French immersion to non-French immersion? Because I think when we talk about de-streaming, French immersion has been a streaming system. There's no. So-
Yes. And I would agree with you. Having had a child who, prior to diagnosis and treatment, was in French immersion, and the first solution handed to me, to which I very quickly reminded them that literacy was literacy, and as you say, and we can support her in French, because the English, we can support her in French. But that was the very first option, and, you know, for my child who at the time was struggling. And it was an appropriate solution to just move her out simply because, oh, here in November, she's struggling. And, you know, diagnosis, treatments, child ended up in a gifted program, right? Like, you can't just, you've got to be very careful how you quickly just want to say, oh, no, this is maybe not for you. So I think that's huge, because parents are being told one thing at an orientation and being told something else different. My concern is when you get a dual track school and there's such a discrepancy between one side to the other, it's really no longer a choice for parents. I think, you know, if you're looking at French immersion as a choice, like a stream you can choose to put your child in, if that's your home school and you have 20, and I would agree, it's probably 20/80, if not even less, you know, as far as the English goes, that you start to look at that as a parent, and my older daughter was going into grade 1, there was one English, one grade 1, 2 split. By the second one, 3 years later, 6 French immersion, 1 grade 1, 2 split. So your numbers, it no longer becomes a choice for parents if that's your home school. And I think that's probably the concern, and if, you know, I don't speak French either, and couldn't support my children at all, because that's how bad my French is. But it became not a choice. So I think that's something we have to look at, because I know there is a level of frustration amongst those parents and those families on both sides, right? For those kids who parents chose English, not for any other reason, but they understood it, right? So there's that side as well. So anyway, just some neighborhood conversations. So.
Yeah, I think excellent suggestion. One of my roles was French version, as a principal of the French version dual track. School with 8 special education classes at the time. So
you get it.
I get it.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Which was that one?
RH1-ish, when we were at 820 kids.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you go to school, it doesn't really have a special needs classroom, but in effect, that's the other side, right? So we just want to make sure everybody's getting what they need on all sides, right? So, okay, anybody else with community, with concerns? Right? No? Celebrations and successes. Tara.
Adam turned 16 2 weeks ago. He is 16.
Yeah.
And he has been bragging about it for the past month and a half. He had a great time. His teacher was amazing. They did cupcakes and she was fantastic. Like, sent out pictures saying he's got like this picture of, you know, Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, like cakes, and it's like the world's coming together, looking at all his cupcakes. It was the best. I'll send it if you guys want to see it. But the highlight for him was he got to go to the Oshawa Generals game last week. And his neighbor, who basically his like surrogate grandfather, actually got him into the Oshawa Generals dressing room. So he got to meet the players. And God bless bless them all, they were amazing kids, like these young gentlemen were fantastic to him and just, they treated him like gold, so that was just great, so that was him. Nothing education related, but I just had to go, look at 16 and I feel really old, but that's okay.
It's all education.
It's good.
That's like the kids stuff, that's their.
Oh, don't. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'm gonna throw mine up, because anybody who knows my youngest at all knows that like a couple of years ago, she would talk to me, like little me half the time. But definitely she didn't know you should, not only because she didn't talk to you, she couldn't talk to you. And she's done so much work and made so much progress, and she's now, you know, well into her first semester at university, took care of her student accessibility stuff all herself, and is literally living her best life. And I said to her, it sounds like you're living your best life, and she's like, I really am. She's made friends, and everything is like, I couldn't be, every once in a while I think about it, I get teary, because I think a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have dreamt us being here. And in this spot, but to see her like that is just like, to me, the biggest success that. So, anyway, so that's mine. So, all right. If we have no more, our next SEAC meeting is December 16th, 2022. Again, reiterate the importance of quorum. And we just need a motion to adjourn. Happy, seconders? Elizabeth, all in favor? Anybody opposed? Thank you, everybody. Yeah, that's. Yeah. Are we off? He wants me to pay for his friend.